All right, now we're recording. That answers somebody's question, by the way. Are we going to record this? The simple answer is yes, we are. So, good morning, everyone. Sorry, we ran into some technical difficulties, mostly me. I couldn't get into the event. So, that was sort of a challenge. I'm Amy McLaughlin. I serve as COSIN Cybersecurity Initiative Director, and I'm really happy to welcome you to our October webinar. So traditionally in October, we do a webinar focused on a cybersecurity topic in honor of the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And today we're going to actually take a good look at the changing landscape of cybersecurity insurance and how that's affecting our schools, districts, and service districts around the country. So when cybersecurity insurance was really first introduced into the IT space, there was a tendency for organizations to sort of buy a policy, heave a huge sigh of relief and go, I don't have to worry about cybersecurity because I've just transferred all my risk to my insurance company. That was, an approach, probably not an advisable approach, but that model is no longer viable either for organizations or for insurance providers, given the vast increase in cybersecurity attacks. We're seeing that the cyber insurance realm has changed significantly, and our insurance companies are demanding us to take actions in order to remain insured. And so that's a large part of what we're going to talk about. If you think about this, it's sort of the corollary to, home insurance. They want you to install like smoke detectors and fire alarms and water suppression systems to reduce the cost of insurance. But before we launch into a really in-depth discussion of cyber insurance and the risk assessment processes that they're using today, I'd like to welcome our amazing panel, and I'm going to have each panelist introduce themselves. And if you have questions, please submit them to chat. We have some pre-built questions, and then we'll also open it up for group questions at the end. So let's go ahead and start with panel introductions. Let's start with, where's our panelist slide? Well, let's go ahead. We'll start with Rachel Wente-Cheney. I'm going to start from the west side of the country and move east, which is going to be a challenge because once we get to the middle, I don't know who's where, but we'll
this is
figure it out.
A geography test this morning.
It is.
Yes. Good morning, Amy, and thanks for hosting this today. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Wente-Cheney. I am the Chief Information Officer at High Desert Education Service District, which is in Central Oregon. We provide network and information services for a growing list of districts in our region, and I'm happy to partner with many of my CIO peers and CISO peers in Oregon and Washington as we do this work together out here in the upper left corner of the US.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. Tony, let's go to you in Des Moines. Des Moines? Is that where you are?
Yep, my name is Tony Harvey. I am the Chief Information Officer for Muncie Community Schools. I have been with Muncie Schools for 6 years now, and my responsibility includes making sure that we have safe, reliable, and secured network. And so cybersecurity and infrastructure security is part of my job. I'm excited about this forum, and I want to know what everyone else has, because I dabble a lot in cybersecurity and I'm interested to know the perspective of my colleagues and peers. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tony. And to Rod Rousseau, just outside of Chicago.
Hey, Amy, thank you, and welcome everyone. My name is Rod Rousseau. I'm the Director of Technology and Information Services here at Community High School District 99, which is about an hour west of Chicago. We're a high school district, and we have about 5,000 kids. And I've been in the district for 25 years. So I like to say I started when email was brand new, and things have changed a bit. And I spent about 18 years before that in the software development industry, developing and supporting student information systems and financial systems. So even though I've been doing this tech thing since 1977, I'm an old dog, but I'm kind of new to the cybersecurity realm. And Amy, I credit a lot of that with you, and that I took a COSIN class that Amy taught in 2018, a wonderful cybersecurity class, and that kind of sparked me into this learning curve, and I continue to learn, and I'm humbled to be here today, and I look forward to learning from all of you.
Thanks, Rod. Appreciate that. And by the way, appreciate the shout out for that. Class starts again late this week. So if you're interested, we still have spaces available. So let's start with our first question about cybersecurity insurance. What changed this year in your experience with your cybersecurity insurance provider from like previous years?
I can jump in, Amy, with just a basic answer in that everything changed. I liken to say that in years past, we'd see maybe a page of questions and they were relatively basic and simple, pretty easy to answer. And this year, just multiple pages of questions, back and forth dialogue I was having with insurance providers to clarify certain answers. Tremendous amount of focus on multi-factor, on policies and procedures, on backups. Not just are you backing up, but about how many levels and off-sites and air gaps, user awareness and in training, even more advanced expectations that some of the applications had for an endpoint detection and response systems in place. I know it's not overnight, but it almost feels like overnight they went from having a page or so of requirements to many pages. And I'm sure based on the attacks that we've all seen across the world, they're in the business to make money too. So eventually they need to protect themselves and make sure that we're protecting ourselves.
So Tony and Rachel, was that consistent with your experience of the last year as well?
Yes, the list has been growing at my end, and some of the questions they are asking are not typical. And as Rod said, they may have been trying to cover all the bases based on the security trends applying these days. One of the questions that elevated my brain was asking about a disaster recovery plan and whether data at rest and data in motion are encrypted. I wonder how many school districts encrypt data at rest and data in motion, and how many of them know about it. But those were questions that were not asked 2 years, last 3 years questionnaire when we had our insurance assessment. So they have elevated the questions and making sure that we are aware of the kind of stuff that we need to implement at the school level. Because once we see these questions, it pokes us to figure out, are we doing these things? What are some of the stuff that threat actors look at when they are trying to hack your system or invade your system? So yeah, there were a lot more questions than typical, but they were all in line with risk assessment.
Similar here on the West Coast, we have in the past had not only our organizational general insurance policies, right, of which there was a small slice of security, information security, right, that was, paper, people, and process based, I think, as Rod and Tony both mentioned, and also the more technical cybersecurity, quote unquote. And so we've had organizational policies that spoke to that in the past. And then we've also had shared pool coverage, right? Generally in like our large umbrella policies at state levels or provided by kind of the organizational umbrella organizations in our states or in our regions. And what we started hearing, actually, I want to give a thank you to K-12-6, which is a group that COSIN partners with on some of this work as well. Doug Levin and the amazing team there hosted an insurance full day, essentially symposium last year. And I attended with my region's CIOs. We kind of sat together on this all day virtual event. And they had industry experts in that event that day talking about the changes that would be coming really quickly. And we had heard some rumbling about it, and we had been doing work in our region for 5 years around information security. So we were steeped in these conversations already, but really that insurance symposium and kind of what's coming soon hosted by K6 is when we sat up and we thought, oh, so in addition to that umbrella coverage, right, that state pool, which we heard would be possibly going away because the global reinsurers, right, are running those numbers, and they are losing money on these policies. And then our organizational insurance policy would be become more expensive, right? If we didn't have certain safeguards in place, or we might not be able to have that information security section of it. And then in addition to that, we actually felt like it was time for us to each individually have add-on cybersecurity riders and information security policies. So for a set number of dollars, right, to help cover and be a safety net underneath those other layers of insurance. So as we moved through those stages and those gates, getting ready for the process that we all finished up this summer, there were those kind of increased requirements that Rod and Tony just spoke to. And for us, multi-factor authentication, encryption, and backups, things like that, we've been working on collectively and individually for quite a while now, continuing to get better. And I think actually it was Rod who mentioned the endpoint detection and response really becoming more of a focus of those surveys and those questions on being able to not only detect quickly, but respond quickly with these software tools and these security tools is a layer that we had some catch up to do on.
So I'm curious then, it sounds like all of you've gone through this extensive risk assessment process, list a questionnaire from your insurance organizations. Sounds like an assignment you don't want to leave till 5 o'clock on the day it's due. So what kind of planning, timing, how long did it take you to do this, and what kind of planning did you have to do to get through that process? And who did you work with in your districts?
I can jump in again. I'll kind of double up and finish the first one and start this one. And I was hoping that you would ask this question, Amy, because I actually went, I'm a big fan of Lizzo, recording, musician, recording artist. And a number of years ago when Lizzo came on the scene and in a very big splash and popular way, people were like, oh, she's an overnight success. And here's Lizzo's answer to being an overnight success. 8 years of touring, giving out free tickets to undersold shows, sleepless nights in my car, almost giving up on music, playing shows for free beer and food with $32 in my bank account, constantly writing songs, hearing no, but always saying yes. Glad I never gave up. We actually started this work in our region 5 years ago, Amy, and like in a very specific way and at the board level. And so I wanted to be able to say yes to not waiting until the night before it's due for the actual technical paperwork, because there was more detail to these recent assessment and application matrices. But there's also a lot that you can't turn on overnight. And as these requirements continue tightening, it really does take organizational change, management planning, buy-in from the board and administrators, and then just figuring out which way you want to go, right? Like we thought we were in pretty good shape with our endpoint protection, and we were not at the EDR level yet and had some big investments to make. And so I will say I would give it at least 2 weeks and 5 years before it. And if you haven't started that 5 years yet, it's not too late to start now, right? Having these conversations. And one thing that the insurance companies are doing is actually elevating this to the board level in a way that maybe some organizations haven't been wanting to pay attention to cybersecurity or technology before. And I was happy to partner with my CFO on this work internally to our organization, and led on the individual cybersecurity policy side, and then partnered with the CFO as it related to our overall insurance coverage.
Rachel, I love your comments. I've been, as I've just been on this learning curve to learn more about cybersecurity, the one thing that has struck me like a load of bricks the whole way along is that prior to this, I thought security was just a technical thing. It's so much an organizational thing, an administrative thing, a human thing. that we've actually been fortunate for a couple of years now. Like a lot of districts, we don't have a full-time security staff. You know, there's a few of us that kind of share that role, and we all have a bunch of other things to do too. We've been fortunate the past few years to work with a VCSO. So that idea of hiring an expert from the outside to spend time with you on a regular basis. And again, thinking initially, oh man, they're going to come in and just dive into the nuts and bolts. So much of the time we've spent in those meetings has been organizational policies, procedures, expectations, risk management, identifying risks and such. So I think the planning, we were just extremely fortunate that we've been spending a few years already doing that work. And are we perfect? Are we where we need to be? No way. Were we able to pretty easily go through this list and answer a lot of the questions from knowledge and from what we have done? We were able to. Yet I know that you know, let's say we implemented multi-factor authentication like 8 to 12 months before the insurance requirement came. Yet I know there were districts that were scrambling with that, where that and perhaps other things. So I don't know, Amy, how much planning you can really do for completing the assessment, but I think it goes back to just those fundamentals and just starting to work on that at an organizational level. And just by virtue of doing that, you'll end up in a better position.
I appreciate that, Rod. I think that's a great point, right? There's they will take you less time to get the assessment done if you've done sort of the years of prep work up front, as opposed to cramming for the exam, since we're in education, at the last moment. So Tony, question for you. I'll start with you. What questions on the assessment that you got from your insurance company were sort of the surprises or the curveballs, or were there any that stumped you, left you going, oh, didn't think about that?
It has to do with the intrusion detection system they were asking about. So they were asking about IPS, intrusion prevention system, and detection systems, and data loss prevention system. And I said to myself, lucky me, because E-rate does not allow me to buy advanced firewall, all right? So I cannot use E-rate funding to buy an advanced firewall, and I have to deal with the basic firewall. I was able to get advanced firewall, which is not supported by E-rate. And to be able to get your systems to be protected, whether using IDS or IPS, you need to make sure that you have either the software or the hardware. So I kept asking myself, if I didn't have a solid firewall, or I didn't have Carbon Black or whichever application I had as my antivirus to do the detection, how was I going to answer these basic questions to this insurance company, asking whether I have an IPS or IDS? They also wanted to know about multi-factor authentication. We have a dicey problem here. It's one of the best solutions if you want to secure your user account. But you are asking your users, who are the weakest link in your ecosystem, to authenticate using a code on their personal cell phone, all right? So what controls do you have when you're asking someone to use their personal cell phone as a means to authenticate themselves? What controls does the institution? My school district has over someone's personal phone. How do you ask them to use this particular system? Because they are trying to log on to their computer, and you cannot use the same computer for the multi-factor. You have to use something external to that. Those were the questions that I wasn't surprised they came in, but I was surprised they kept asking. If you say yes, you have to provide further answer. If you say no, you have to explain why. So you are stuck between answering it the way you think it should be and the way that you feel it should not. The other one has to do with, you have an up-to-date active firewall. What is up to date? What is active? It's all relative, right? So active could be, yes, I'm downloading all the patch, but is my firewall able to do threat analysis? Am I able to look at logs and determine whether there are threat actors on my firewall, or is just going to passively look at your data and then let it pass through? Are there firewalls that can do DDoS or DDoS attacks? Check those for you. How do you look at the logs, or how do you look at the system and determine whether you are overusing your bandwidth and have bad packets coming? Those are questions that they went beyond, and I'm wondering what will be the next time we do this assessment.
I think that's, Tony, that's a really interesting, you bring up a really interesting point, is the language of the questions themselves has to be understood, because what are they defining as an active firewall? What are the limitations that we have based on funding sources? For example, you bring up a point that this isn't new to anybody, I've harped on for a while, which is, hello, we need to be able to buy next generation firewalls with advanced security features to protect school districts. And that's been a long conversation with you, right? Rachel and Rod, did you run into some questions that were tough and that you had to parse out, like how you would answer those, and how did you approach them?
For me, Tony kind of alluded to this a little bit. Was there's always a fine line between 100% compliance with the question, understanding the question, kind of that reasonable person test. I'm a perfectionist. So if I were to answer every question by my own personal lens, I was sure we have an incident response plan, but this part needs to be tweaked a little bit, or this part isn't as good as it can be. There are so many of the questions that I struggled with a little bit in terms of that. I had to put on my reasonable person hat and really answer them in that way. Kind of what Tony was alluding to, there was one question that asked if we had email security filtering in place. Well, that's like 2 or 3 or 4 different things. So I kind of answered that yes with a footnote. We have these specific things in place. Hopefully they would then know what we had in place. So that's kind of what I did, either as part of the application. And as I said before, I was surprised at some of the back and forth clarifications that came my way, really, from the insurance without me asking anything. One other thing I'll note is that insurance was obviously attuned to some of the more recent critical vulnerabilities that had been exposed out in the wild. We got a whole separate addendum that we had to fill out regarding Microsoft Exchange. Because of some of the very critical Exchange problems that have occurred in the past year. We're fortunate that we're not using Exchange at all anymore, but had we been using Exchange, there was literally a page of questions where they drilled down into pretty good detail about what kind of relationship you had.
Interesting. Rachel, did you have a similar experience with yours?
I really think both Tony and Rod nailed it in just the interpreting the language was the part that was the stumper, right? And this goes to, we've been working towards a SOC 2 audit for a few years. We were actually going to be finished by now, but the pandemic delayed the ability for the on-site interviews when they were originally scheduled. And I think about those insurance surveys in a little bit of the same context, where they're kind of just like a really high level, like pre-check. And then it's those individual conversations or like audit questions that our fiscal offices have, they've managed this for years, where there are actually detailed questions that can be asked in context that have a kind of logic or a conditional tree that they're following. If you have this, then I have these 4 questions. And if you have that, I have, another 7 questions. And these insurance surveys were certainly really built with that risk management lens, right? That are just trying to make sure that we have an awareness and that we have a high level understanding of what we need to have in place. So I defaulted to Rod's reasonable person answers on ours as well.
I think that's a great answer, by the way. I believe that the reasonable person clause is one of the things they try to train you on the CISSP cybersecurity exam. It talks about what is a reasonable person interpretation, which is probably the safe way to go in this space. One of the big surprises that I think a number of districts encountered when they got their cybersecurity questionnaire or risk assessment, depending on who your insurance company is, was the push for MFA. And I know one of our audience questions was, for those of you that have transitioned to MFA, how was your experience transitioning staff to multi-factor authentication? Did you run into staff or union pushback?
I'll jump in again on, is that okay, Rod? Okay, great. I'll say we started this, our MFA requirements in 2017 with our administrators, our business office and HR, our technical staff, obviously. And we've had high level buy-in for a number of years. And so in the year prior, when many of my peers around the state have essentially needed to kind of, we need to be doing this. And there was a lot of worry, especially around like devices. I think Tony mentioned, right? The number one, there's a technical piece around I heard his questions, right? About like personal cell phones and how do we want to do this? And then there is a hesitation that you will have employees who are like, I'm not using my personal device for work, right? I've had a clean wall between that all along, and I'm not willing to do that. I will say from my seat, and again, we've had our leadership help enforce this message. So it's been pretty stress-free and pretty pain-free and just kind of been cruising along for a while now. We, out of almost 1,000 people, so we're not like the scale of a large metro area district in terms of the number of employees, but out of 1,000 people, we have 2 people who we purchased MF, like a YubiKey or a hardware key for, because they did not want to use their phone, and everyone else was did not ask for that. And I will say that what I have noticed as we watch the analytics on our app usage and how they're being used, as we moved more towards that, and I'm going to say the buzzword zero trust, but I mean like, providing more out via internet and via apps and being able to see our identity, our access, and our authentication routes and how those are coming in. We have a growing number, we're well over 30% of our users who are accessing their work spaces via mobile on a daily basis at this point, and it just keeps climbing. It may be over 40% if I looked, with the continuing kind of hybrid and working different places that the pandemic brought to us. So it was not as stressful as I thought it was going to be, and our numbers of staff who were really concerned about using their own device were low, and we had a simple solution by providing a hardware key in those situations.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rachel. Rod, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, Rachel, we had a similar experience. We've been requiring MFA for VPN access for some time. And of course, our tech staff for the work that they do as well. And I think a lot of it goes, again, to that organizational leadership part of it and involving them in the process and the message. We really didn't have a lot of pushback either. We've been just communicating over and over again about security and encouraging people to use MFA in their own lives even before we required it here. And we, a handful of questions, a handful of issues, but the vast majority of people understand and went along with it. I know I've heard of other districts where it didn't go as smoothly, where they had union pushback and such, but fortunately that wasn't our experience here.
I had a soft rollout. So I started with my IT team because I know it's easy to twist arms in the IT department. So I started with my peers to make sure that it rolls out well. We understood all the issues that we were having. I had to do a lot of setup training, security education training awareness for them to know that this is how it helps in. And I have to segment my requirements by application. So like Rob, I started with VPN because only a few of my team have VPN. The top echelon has VPN. So to have VPN access, you have to use so many ways to authenticate. And then I also went to email and then roll it out to data privacy. So it's been a soft rollout, trying to get people to understand that this small application or this small step you're going to take has the potential to protect the entire district's network, to protect the entire student's data. And if we all don't buy in, one person's mistake could cost us a lot of downtime. And so it's not a scare tactics, it's to be real, showing them on monthly basis or weekly basis the kind of schools or the big schools that have been attacked all over the US and who the threat actors are. It's scary enough for people to understand that if you play your role, you'll be protecting us from all the data hacks, you'll be protecting our network and making us resilient. So we had a soft rollout, people bought in, and there are a few holdouts that we're working on, but as expected, we are hoping that with time, they will buy into this practice.
Awesome. That's a great point. Tony, I think that also brings up something really important, which is when you start with the people who are sort of at the highest level and have the most access, you're also starting with your leadership and having them model the behavior you want to see for the rest of the organization. So not only are you reducing risk at that soft, with that soft rollout, but you're also being like, if we can do it, anybody can do it, which can be really helpful. So I have, I was curious, I tend to be the person who looks at these kind of assessments and opportunities as that opportunity to make a case, to carry forward a message. So how are you using what are your positive outcomes from completing your risk assessment, and how are you using that risk assessment to move your security program forward?
I will take this question. Over the years, I have used this assessment to enrich my network infrastructure and environment. Since I took this position, there hasn't been a penetration testing, all right? So based on this assessment, I had to do a penetration testing. I had to beef up my firewall. I know my users in any network are the weakest link. So if you educate them and you explain to them and you let them know the reasons why you are implementing a particular strategy, they will get to understand, they will work with you. You cannot push it down their throat. So continuous training always helps, and it's always helped us. We made sure that we know they were going to ask about your data, your backup. So we had to back up. There is no way, even with the assessment, there is no way any school district can perform or survive without the basic security measures, right? We have to authenticate one way or the other. We have to log on to a device. We have to know who is on our network at any point in time. We have to know the data set we have and the size of the data set we have at any point in time. We have to know who has been hired and who has been terminated. So at what point do you terminate email accounts of users who have left us? Who has access to your data when they are home? Are they able to download that data onto their laptop? Even your technicians and your IT people, who has access to sensitive data? Can any IT person reset the password of your superintendent? If they can, then you are in trouble because they can easily reset a password and then read the emails that they're going to be fired. And the superintendent will come the following day and say, I cannot get into my account. We just reset the password for her and she's back in. So you have to have that cascading rights for all the permissions are important, and all those were built based on the assessment. I knew what I have to do, but this assessment is almost helping me to know what the industry trend is, what is happening elsewhere, because they are trying to protect themselves, and the information or questions they are asking are based on what has happened in other places. So even though they're making a lot of money, because knock on wood, we haven't been attacked in 6 years, I think I need a refund from them because I've been a good guy in this district. So I think that it's helped us be good IT directors. It's helped the district to be resolute, and it's also provided us with information as to what is happening in other IT industries.
I like that Tony mentioned that in insurance frame on the, today we're talking about our cybersecurity insurance and risk assessments. So I think that the insurance companies' assessments were helpful because we know specifically, Tony's right, it's a little bit of a signal, right, on what they're seeing and where those vulnerabilities are that are actually causing actionable or cost-oriented breaches and events. But I just want to say that I think we also all hit on the idea that the language and the structure of them are very generic and fairly non-specific. And so to partner on top of what Tony just said there, I do think COSIN has a cybersecurity self-assessment. K-12-6, I believe Keith Kruger was with Doug Levin, the directors of both organizations. K-12-6 recently launched a new one. April Murdoch, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Seattle Public Schools, she was instrumental in that work, and their new assessment is super helpful as well. These standards that we have, right, whether they are essentially NIST or CISA or CIS controls, I would encourage, if you're on this webinar and so far all you've done is an insurance risk assessment related to your insurance policy, I would highly encourage going and searching out some of those other self-assessments. And again, COSIN has a great one as well. And it's right on, if you just Google COSIN cybersecurity assessment, you can get to that link. They really help walk through the basics and those foundations that I think Rod especially spoke to early on.
So on a related note, when we start thinking about assessments or the cyber insurance renewals for next year, Christine had a question. Do you anticipate any non-negotiables popping up in the 2022 cyber insurance renewals? Like if you had to look at what you've went through this year, what do you think they're going to actually make sure that you can say, yes, I have that in place?
Yeah, I would imagine, Amy, that multi-factor authentication would probably be must have backups in terms of multi-level backups, different locations, and air gap as well. I think there was a lot of focus on those as well. And I think just, and again, it's like Rachel mentioned, it's so generic in terms of how things are asked, but the whole risk assessment process, and thank you, Rachel, for mentioning those tools. That's a great way for somebody to start if you haven't done a risk assessment yet. But I think just that process, I don't know how they'll word that and phrase that, but I think making sure that we've done that homework ourselves coming into the conversation is something that they'll focus on a lot more too.
I thought that personnel is going to be one of the critical areas, because you can have all the infrastructure or devices or hardware you want. If you don't have a privacy officer or a security officer to dig into all the logs, all right, networking is log reading and looking at threats. I am the CISO, I am the privacy officer, I'm the everything, and I'll tell you, it's not easy trying to look at your firewall log and see what is going on. So personnel, getting the right people, one or two people to help with looking at your firewall and your switches and looking at what is trending or who is on it is going to be very critical. And it's one of the questions that they ask you, whether you have a chief privacy officer and whether you have a chief information security officer. And we are a small school district and are trying to afford someone to dedicate himself to looking at all the actors on your network as one of the areas that we need to beef up because it's likely to happen. And when it does, are you ready? What are you going to look at? What kind of logs are you going to look at? Are you, that kind of stuff. So personnel and controls and privacy controls are some of the areas that I am looking at next year.
That's a great point, but nobody said you needed sleep, Tony. No, you're right. It is hard to find trained personnel, to have the budget to bring them in, and to have the equipment and the people to monitor at that discrete level. So I think that is a challenge. Rachel, are there any others that you think might be non-negotiables in 2022?
I do think there will be. For those who are part of MS ISAC, and I'm going to do another plug for an organization that's super helpful in this space. If you have not heard of MS ISAC yet, Google that, MSISAC. It is an information sharing organization backed by the Department of Homeland Security, the CIA, FBI, all of the alphabet soup at the federal level. There was a briefing earlier this month, actually, I guess it would have been in September last month, and it wasn't meant to be publicly shared. So I'm just going to say at a high level that there are large changes coming, right, that are in the works at the insurance organizations. So I think if I'm having my pessimistic hat on, it's that it'll be almost impossible to get insurance by this time next year, and unless things change in between. And if there are still global reinsurers willing to underwrite insurance companies that we have relationships with, I would expect a lot of those things on this year's assessment to be requirements next year. Sounds like there's some legislation and some ideas of some of the legislative remedies that can maybe make ransomware less attractive in terms of like limiting payouts and things like that. So we'll see how those play into this, but I think it's not going to get easier is how I'll end that analysis.
Just a quick side question or related question. In your insurance reviews, I know Rod mentioned an incident response plan. Were your insurance companies requiring both a security plan and an incident response plan for this renewal session?
The question was, did we have one? I don't know what their rubric was on the other side. And I mean, I was able to answer yes for both. And I don't know if we had answered no, if they would have come back with a either, lower coverage level or a denial, but it was a question.
Right, it was a question on ours also.
Yeah, it was a question on mine too. And they didn't ask me whether it's up to date or not, or whether it's been implemented. So I answered yes.
You had one, whether it was up to date or not, right? And, by the way, Rachel, I appreciate that plug for MSISAC. They're one of our COSIN partners. They do some amazing work. Also, if for some reason you're sitting there thinking, oh, I don't have a cybersecurity plan and I don't have an incident response plan, COSIN has a workshop coming up at the end of October, the 19th, 20th, and 21st, specifically focused on building those plans. So I'm going to put that shameless plug in there for that workshop, because if you don't have that plan that you're going to need for your insurance, come and join us. We will help you get your plan in place. There's a really good and interesting question from our audience. The question is that it's from Richard. I recently had an opportunity to learn about security ratings companies that perform ongoing vulnerability assessments against organizations based on the perceived footprint of that organization on the web, and they provide a sort of credit score type rating. And that some of the cyber liability insurers are using those ratings. Have any of you had any experience with this type of rating agency?
We've had penetration tests and vulnerability assessments done, so we've received reports from those, Amy, but not any kind of a public rating scale or anything, more just for internal consumption.
I was made aware of this as we were at the beginning stages of planning our SOC 2 process and audit. And so for those, so a SOC 2 is essentially an audit of your technical infrastructure and your information security infrastructure. It's done by CPA firms, similar to fiscal audits. And so it was actually brought up in our initial discovery and planning talks with the CPA firm who is doing our audit. They referenced it quite a bit, right? That they indicated that it was not something that we needed to focus on. But to Richard's question, I had not heard about it before, but apparently it's very common in the insurance industry and underwriting spaces.
Okay. Well, we are getting close to the end of our hour. Wanted to come back and ask this is sort of the 30-second shout out. Actually, let me back up for one moment. I also want to point out that the cost and risk assessment, I put the link in the thread. And when you take that, it will give you sort of a rating style report number. It also will give you what I will call an elementary school style grade. I.e., we're not going to give you an A through an F. We're going to tell you, hey, you are satisfactory. You're meeting expectations, needs improvement. You all know the scale because this is that's exactly where we lifted it from, was this notion of development and growth, not you are either scoring an A or scoring an F. So, but you will see like a number score as well as a description of what that means and where you are in your development of your cybersecurity program. So I wanted to take a moment to ask each of our panelists, before we leave, your 30-second piece of advice, one tip from each panelist to get through the insurance cycle process, and what you would hope somebody takes away from this panel today. So Rachel, we're going to go alphabetical by first name because that's easy for me to do. Rachel, you're first. What's your tip of the day?
My tip of the day is to start researching and learning and using the language of risk management, partnering with your CFO and your leadership so that these conversations actually start happening at the board level. Because once the board understands that there is risk involved and that risk involves money in most of these cases and data, they will be able to help be the one to direct the superintendent to allocate resources.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rachel. Rod, you're next.
I love that, Rachel. And my tip is going to be kind of post-insurance policy. So you've went through all this assessment, you've got your policy signed, sealed, and it's in a drawer. Read it. Read your policy. Know what the coverage is, know how to contact people, when to contact. One critical thing, a reason why you want to read your policy, is if you're using an outside, if you're using your own security firm for incident response assistance, your policy may not allow you to use other firms other than the ones that they provide or that they vet. So please read your policy, make sure if that is indeed a requirement, reach out to your carrier and make sure that your IR firm is able to get vetted and included. Otherwise, when that time comes, you might be caught not getting the reimbursement that you thought.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rod. And Tony, over to you.
My tip is for you to use your insurance assessment as a learning tool. So everything in there, you need to practice it because they are useful tools. They've covered a lot of ground. So you need to practice using those assessment questions. And if you do that and you practice and you standardize, you will not have any issues answering those questions over the years. So practice whatever they're asking, use it as a tool to practice, and make sure that you're covering all the grounds and going beyond what those assessment tools are asking you. So yep, that is my tip for everyone.
I think that's fantastic. And Tony, that really speaks to not shoving your assessment in a drawer and ignoring it till the next year, but also leveraging that as a communications tool to move the organization forward and to request funding. And that would be my tip. Use these kind of things as part of your messaging to get the funding that you need to do the work that has to be done. And, you know, as opposed to seeing it as a, oh, I got that done and now I need to move on to my next thing on my list. Because this is a continuous, security is always a continuous improvement process. We're never done. The bar keeps moving. Sorry if that made anybody's day stressful, but there it is. And I want to thank our amazing panel today. Thank you, Tony, Rod, and Rachel for being here today. I really appreciate it. And at this point, I'm going to turn over to Jill Brown, who's just going to give us a little bit more background information, some more things people have the option to follow up on. So Jill, it is all yours.
Great. I want to thank our panelists. You did an amazing job and we appreciate everyone being here today. I've put links for some upcoming opportunities that COSN has available to help you along with this and some other needs that you might have in your job. We would also like to thank our sponsors that enable COSN to provide so many supports for you and your school. Have a nice day.